Have you ever had kimchi or maybe some sourdough bread or perhaps a nice cold glass of beer? Well, if you have, then you've probably enjoyed the fruits of fermentation. Fermentation, the process of using microorganisms like bacteria and fungi to convert one thing into another. People have been harnessing this kind of molecular alchemy for thousands of years to turn humble ingredients into delicious foods and beverages. And it is no surprise we continue to do so because what these little microbe factories produce is both tasty and nutritious. But I believe it can do even more than that. In the coming decades, we may look to microbes and fermentation to help feed our planet and its growing population. Now, this sounds like science fiction, but hear me out. What if instead of relying solely on livestock to convert plant matter into protein for us, we could use microbes to do the heavy lifting? Microbes already do this in ways that we've been taking advantage of for centuries, like turning sugar into alcohol or lactic acid. But I think we can put them to work doing much more. So let's talk about how fermentation works and what the future could hold. Fermentation is a form of anaerobic metabolism, meaning it doesn't require oxygen. Instead of using oxygen as an electron acceptor to make energy, organisms that ferment use something else. This is great because many parts of the world don't have easy access to oxygen. In the absence of oxygen, cells will carry out a less efficient form of energy production, generating only 2 ATP molecules per molecule of glucose instead of the 38 AP molecules produced during aerobic respiration. But they get the job done. In order to make up for the low energy yield, organisms that ferment recycle key components of the metabolic pathway to keep it chugging along. Take yeast, for instance. When yeast cells ferment, they convert sugars like glucose into carbon dioxide and ethanol. This is why when you leave a bottle of wine or champagne uncorked, it goes flat and tastes like vinegar instead of bubbly. Alcohol is the end product of fermentation for yeast, which dies when the alcohol concentration gets too high. However, other microbes like bacteria can take that alcohol and ferment it further into carbon dioxide and acetic acid, giving us vinegar. There are 3 main types of fermentation. The first, lactic acid fermentation, is used by bacteria and some fungi. Lactic acid bacteria, as their name suggests, convert sugars like glucose into lactic acid. This is how organisms like yogurt and pickles are made. The second type of fermentation is ethanol or alcohol fermentation. As I just mentioned, this process is carried out by yeasts and some bacteria. They convert sugars like glucose into ethanol and carbon dioxide. The third type of fermentation is acetic acid fermentation, which is carried out by bacteria like Acidobacter. These bacteria convert ethanol into acetic acid. This is how vinegar and kombucha are made. Now I want to point out that there are tons of different microorganisms that carry out all sorts of different metabolic processes. So there are way more examples of fermentation out there than the ones I've described here. But you get the idea. Byproducts of fermentation can be yummy or stinky, useful or useless. Some fermented foods like kombucha or wine can have health benefits. Others like tofu and tempeh are important sources of nutrition. Tempeh is a fermented soybean cake popular in Indonesia. Like cheese, it is high in protein and calcium, making it an excellent dairy-free cheese substitute. Fermented foods also tend to last longer than non-fermented foods because the acids produced by fermentation inhibit the growth of spoilage organisms. But I want to introduce you to the idea of taking fermentation a step further to not only produce foods that are shelf-stable and nutrient-dense, but also to make new foods from thin air that can serve as non-meat alternatives. To do this, we just need to change the definition of what we consider food. Let's look at the tiny filamentous fungus Aspergillus niger. A. niger is a notorious food spoiler. If you've ever left bread out too long and it's gotten fuzzy, then you've probably seen it in action. If instead of throwing that bread away, you dried it out and ground it up, you could feed it to animals like chickens, pigs, or cows. In fact, Aspergillus niger is so good at breaking down plant matter that it has been put to work industrially to break down cellulose. Its enzymes are used in detergents to break down stains because they can degrade cellulose, which is a major component of clothing like jeans. So if Aspergillus niger can turn plant matter into enzymes that break down plant matter, imagine what it could do with just a little bit of help. Researchers at the University of Queensland have found a way to harness the fungus to produce the protein-rich, food additive corn. The Corn Corporation uses a strain of Fusarium venenatum, a close relative of Aspergillus niger, to produce a meat substitute. The microbes are grown on a substrate like wheat or pea protein. After several days of fermentation, the fungal biomass makes up around 40% of the final product. But the microbes aren't producing the fungal equivalent of steaks and chicken breasts. Instead, the entire mass of microbes is dried and ground into a powder that can be used to add bulk and texture to other foods. The reason the microbes don't produce recognizable animal shapes is that they are constantly being broken up and mixed with other stuff. This brings me to my third example of fermentation, which I call whole biomass fermentation. This isn't a real scientific term or anything, but bear with me. Whole biomass fermentation is the process of growing and consuming the entire mass of microbes that's produced during fermentation. Not only does this include fermented foods like kombucha, which contains a culture of bacteria and yeast known as a SCOBY, but it also includes corn. Imagine growing a crop of single-celled organisms like algae or yeast, harvesting it, drying it, and grinding it up. Sounds weird, right? Well, the company Solar Foods is working to make this a reality. Their process starts with hydrogen, nitrates, carbon dioxide, and water. They mix these inorganic ingredients together and add a microbe called Capna psittophaga. The microbes consume the hydrogen and carbon dioxide and excrete a biomass that can be dried and turned into a powder. According to Solar Foods, this powder can be used as an ingredient in a variety of foods like soups and stews. While the protein content varies depending on the formulation, it is supposedly around 55%. The company claims that its product is nutritionally complete, containing all 9 essential amino acids. It also has a neutral flavor, odor, and color, meaning it can be added to just about anything. Solar Foods hasn't yet brought their product to market, but if they do, it would be pretty awesome. Growing algae and yeast like this takes a lot less land, water, and energy than growing crops like soybeans or wheat. It would also produce a lot less greenhouse gases. Producing 1 ton of soy protein requires around 480 kilograms of fossil fuels. Meanwhile, producing 1 ton of microbial protein only requires 25 kilograms of fossil fuels. As you can see, fermentation can be used to make everything from tasty treats like kimchi to life-saving drugs like insulin to meat substitutes like corn. Now I should mention that there are some downsides to using microbes as a protein source. For one thing, not everyone likes the idea of eating microbes. And for another, microbes are generally lower in protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, or PDCAs, than meat or even plant proteins, like beans or lentils. But this doesn't mean that they can't be used as a protein source, especially when they recombined with other foods or when they more easily digested forms like a powder. In the coming years, we'll need to get creative about how we feed the world. If we're going to keep our global population happy and healthy, we'll need a variety of foods to choose from. Fermentation can help us do that by turning waste into treasure. We've been fermenting things for thousands of years. Maybe it's time we took full advantage of this amazing process. Microbes and fermentation aren't the only tools that we can use to make the food system more sustainable. Check out this playlist to learn about other innovations that are transforming agriculture. And thanks to my supporters who help keep this channel going. I'll see you next time.